The slap itself wasn't the part that changed my life. It was what happened right after. My youngest sister hit me so hard, the side of my face went hot and numb in the same second. And before I could even straighten my head, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Apologize to your sister right now or get out of my house." Then my father walked to the front door, opened it, and held it there, like I was not his daughter. Like I was smoke he was trying to let out. I remember the smell of roasted turkey and clove-heavy sweet potatoes hanging in the air. I remember somebody's fork freezing halfway to their mouth. I remember my own heartbeat sounding strangely slow, like my body had stepped outside itself to watch. And I remember looking around that room at 23 faces, on the family and neighbors and people who had eaten food I paid for in a house I had been quietly keeping afloat for years, and realizing that nobody was going to stop this. Not one person. So I picked up my coat, took my keys from the bowl by the door, and walked out into the cold without saying a word. By 8:30 the next morning, they were calling me like their world was on fire. The truth was, it was. It just took them one night to notice the smoke. My name is Celeste Arden. I'm 37 years old, and before I go any further, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been the one in the family who gave and still got treated like a problem the second you stopped. If you've ever been the daughter who paid the bill, made the call, fixed the mess, covered the shame, and softened the blow, and somehow still got seated at the edge of the table like an afterthought, then you already know this kind of story doesn't begin with one slap. It begins years earlier, long before Thanksgiving, long before the open door, long before I stood in my own grief and finally understood that loyalty can turn into self-betrayal if you don't put a limit on it. I live in Richmond, Virginia now. Or I did then. Back then, I was vice president of acquisition for a hospitality development group that bought distressed boutique properties across the East Coast, repositioned them, and sold them at a profit that made men in Navy suits shake my hand too hard and call me impressive, like it surprised them. I handled purchase structures, debt negotiations, renovation schedules, municipal approvals, and investor relationships. In plain English, I did the work that turns rundown real estate into money, quietly, efficiently. And more importantly for this story, I knew how to read paper, deeds, notes, guarantees, liens, restructuring agreements, all of it. That mattered because while my family thought I worked somewhere in business, I was the one who had been keeping their house, their medical expenses, their second chance loans, and half their dignity from collapsing for almost a decade. My mother never said that out loud. She preferred softer language. Celeste helps. Celeste is stable. Celeste likes handling things. My sister Piper preferred different language. She called me controlling when I asked questions, cold when I refused to wire money without receipts, dramatic when I noticed numbers not adding up, and useful when she wanted something. Piper is 4 years younger than me. She is the kind of woman people mistake for warm because she knows how to smile with all her teeth and tilt her head at the right moment. She learned early that charm gets you farther than discipline if there's always someone nearby willing to clean up after the charm stops working. For most of our lives, that someone was me. Our mother, Denise, loved being needed, but only in ways that made her feel cherished, not burdened. She loved the daughter who lived close, dropped by, called every day, sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine and listened to neighborhood gossip. That was Piper. I was the daughter who left, the daughter who built a career, the daughter who sent checks from 3 hours away, the daughter who solved problems too efficiently to look sentimental doing it. So while I was the one paying for things, Piper was the one getting thanked in public. That is a very specific humiliation, by the way. To fund a family and still be treated like a guest in it, you smile through it for a while, then one day you stop. My grandmother June understood that long before I did. She raised me more than either of my parents ever really did. My father worked long shifts when I was little. My mother was always overwhelmed, always tired, always one inconvenience away from reminding you how much she'd given up to have children. Piper was younger, louder, prettier in the easy way adults notice and reward. So I spent most of my real childhood at Grandma June's row house, with the green shutters and the creaky kitchen floor. She taught me how to fold towels tight enough that they stacked square, how to make stew taste better the second day, how to balance a checkbook before I was old enough to drive, how to tell when someone was asking for help and when they were assigning you a role. That last lesson took me the longest. When she was dying, I sat with her in hospice and held her hand while the room smelled like antiseptic and wilted carnations, and the television in the corner played some game show she wasn't watching. Her skin felt papery and warm. Her breathing was thin, but her mind was still clear, clear enough to look at me and say, "Keep this family from scattering, Cece. They're weaker than they act." I was 21, exhausted, heartbroken, and stupid enough to think love meant carrying what other people dropped. So I promised her, and I kept that promise long after it started hurting me. At 25, when my parents' roof failed after a storm and their insurance payout came in short, I wired $19,600 to the contractor and told them it was a short-term bridge until they got sorted. They never repaid me. At 27, when Piper wanted to open her wellness studio, which turned out to be 3 massage chairs, a ring light, a rented storefront, and more ambition than bookkeeping, I fronted $46,000 for the lease deposit, build out, and first quarter payroll because she cried in my car and said, "I just need one person to believe in me." At 29, when my mother's cardiac meds and specialist copay started climbing, I set up an automatic monthly transfer of $1,350 into my parents' joint account so nobody would have to worry about medical stress. That transfer stayed in place for 7 years. Do that math. Actually do it. $1,350 a month for 7 years is over $113,000. Then there was the home equity shortfall after my father took a bad refinancing package, the back property tax lien I cleared, the furnace replacement, the legal retainer when Piper's studio got sued by a former employee over unpaid wages, the emergency transmission repair on Dad's truck, the credit card payoff Mom swore was mostly medical and turned out to include a cruise deposit Piper never took. By the time I was 37, the number was obscene. North of $300,000 if I was being honest. I rarely let myself be honest about it. Because if I was honest, I would have had to ask why people who loved me never hesitated to invoice me emotionally and financially at the same time. When the Thanksgiving that broke everything happened in my hometown of Ashbourne, Maryland. Small place, old streets, white church steeple, neighbors who know which house belongs to which family and who had money 10 years ago and who is pretending now. The drive from Richmond takes about 3 hours if traffic behaves and no one flips a truck on a 95. I left work early the Wednesday before Thanksgiving with the back of my SUV loaded down, like always. Smoked turkey from a place near my office my father liked. 2 trays of stuffing, maple glazed carrots, sweet potato casserole, pecan pie, apple pie, dinner rolls from the bakery my mother always called too expensive while eating every last one. Plus 4 bottles of wine, fresh flowers, and a sealed envelope in my purse with the final paperwork on a line of credit renewal I was considering helping them restructure. Because yes, even then I was still trying. That is the embarrassing part. Not that they betrayed me, that I walked in carrying side dishes and solutions one last time. Piper's white Lexus was already in the driveway when I pulled up. Of course it was. She had started arriving early to things I paid for years ago, because being there first let her rewrite the story of who made them happen. When I came through the side door, the kitchen was warm and loud with the smell of sage butter and the cinnamon candle my mother lit every November like tradition could hide the tension in the walls. Piper was standing at the island, arranging crackers and sliced pears on a wooden board, as if a camera crew might enter at any minute. My mother was fussing with napkins. "There she is," Mom said without hugging me. "Put the hot trays by the stove." No how was the drive. No you made it. No thank you, just instruction. Piper looked over one shoulder and gave me a bright, thin smile. "You're late." I checked the oven clock. 4:06. "I said I'd be here at 4. She shrugged. "Same difference." I started unloading the food, and that was when I noticed the kitchen itself in the way you notice an old wound somebody keeps touching. The quartz counters I paid for 18 months earlier. The brass cabinet pulls my mother said were too fancy until they were installed, and then suddenly she told people she had finally redone the kitchen. The farmhouse sink, the recessed lighting, the refinished floors. Nothing in that room had happened without my money. Not one visible upgrade. And still, if anyone asked, my mother always said, "We've slowly been improving things." We. That word has hidden a lot of theft in families. I was setting the pecan pie near the window when I saw the envelope. Cream paper, official looking, left near the toaster, like somebody had opened it and then decided to deal with it later. Return address, Chesapeake Trust and Lending. The flap had been sliced clean and retucked. I picked it up, not even fully, just enough to turn it in my hand. Piper's voice came sharp behind me. As don't. I looked over my shoulder. Her expression had changed completely. That's private mail, she said. Put it down. I did, but I did not forget it. Because Piper only sounded like that when something mattered. I should explain something here that made everything worse later. 3 years earlier, when my father's first refinance blew up because he'd signed an adjustable note he did not understand, I stepped in and prevented foreclosure by doing two things. First, I covered the delinquent amount and legal fees. Second, on Marcus Lane's advice, Marcus being the real estate attorney I'd used on commercial closings and increasingly quiet family rescues, I insisted my name be placed on the deed as a protective co-owner until the debt structure stabilized. Not because I wanted the house, because I did not trust unmanaged desperation. My parents agreed because they needed me. Piper raged about it for a week, called it controlling, invasive, humiliating. Then she got over it the way people get over safeguards once they're benefiting from them. Or so I thought. That deed mattered more than anyone in that house realized. Dinner that Wednesday was the usual slow violence. No one event bad enough to point at. Just the accumulation. Dad in his recliner watching pregame football while I set down food I'd bought, and he nodded at me like I was a delivery driver. Mom bringing Piper into every conversation like a show dog. This is the glaze Piper picked. Piper got here early and handled the table. Piper's been such a help lately. Piper had not paid one mortgage installment, one utility bill, one medical copay, one contractor deposit, one tax penalty. But she was local, visible, easy to praise. That beats actual contribution more often than people admit. By 7, the house had filled up. Cousins, neighbors, my father's sister Helen, my mother's friend Janice, Piper's husband Nolan, 2 of his brothers, 3 kids under 10, running around with sticky hands, people bringing wine they'd expect someone else to uncork. 20-plus bodies in a house that looked warm enough to fool an outsider. I was in the hallway near the powder room when Piper caught my arm. Her nails dug right through my sweater. Do not say anything tomorrow, she said. About what? Her smile never moved. About the house stuff. I stared at her. What house stuff? She leaned in closer. Her perfume was too sweet, almost rotten in the heat of the hallway. Just eat, smile, and don't start one of your little accounting speeches. Mom is stressed enough. Then she let go of my arm and floated away before I could answer. I stood there with my pulse suddenly too high. That phrase, the house stuff, that envelope in the kitchen, Piper telling me not to say anything before I'd asked a single question. All of it sat in me wrong. That night I slept in the den on the pull-out sofa because Piper and Nolan had claimed the guest room, and my mother acted as if changing that arrangement would be somehow rude. The house settled around me in little noises, pipes, heat vents, a toilet flushing upstairs. Somewhere down the hall someone laughed softly. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling and running numbers in my head the way I always did when I felt unsafe. Mortgage balance, property value, recent renovation costs. Like my monthly transfers. The fact that a lender had sent something official looking and Piper wanted me nowhere near it. I told myself it was just stress. I told myself Thanksgiving made everyone weird. I told myself if something serious had happened, someone would have called me. That last thought now makes me laugh. People only call a reliable daughter before disaster when they want prevention. Once they think they've gotten away with something, they call her last. Thanksgiving morning, I woke before everyone else out of habit. Gray light, cold floors, that hollow quiet houses have before coffee and people. I wrapped a cardigan around myself and went into the kitchen. The envelope was gone from the counter. I saw it 2 minutes later in the recycling bin under a cereal box and a foil pie plate. That alone was enough to make me crouch. When you work around documentation long enough, your eyes know what to look for before your brain does. I slid the envelope out just enough to see the top page inside. Property ownership amendment notice. My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. I didn't pull the whole thing out. I should have. I didn't. Instead, I did something automatic and somehow even more telling. I snapped a photo of the visible header with my phone. Then I slid it back. Footsteps came on the stairs at that exact moment. I stood, opened the potato drawer, and was peeling russets over the sink when my mother walked in tying her robe. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Good. Peel all of them. We'll need extra." "No thanks for making coffee. No why are your hands shaking. Nothing. Just peel." So I did. And while the skins curled off into the sink, I thought about that document and what an ownership amendment could mean on a property where my name already sat on record. Maybe nothing, maybe a clerical update, maybe a refinance correction, or maybe something very, very ugly. I chose peace for the next few hours only because I needed information more than drama. That is one thing people misunderstand about calm women. They think stillness means passivity. Sometimes it means evidence collection. The house was chaos by noon. Turkey in the oven, football on, children everywhere. My mother shouting table placements from the dining room. The smell of butter, onions, rosemary, and yeast rolls soaking into every curtain in the house. I set the table. 23 place settings. My mother seated Piper beside Dad. Of course she did. I put my own plate near the far end by the kitchen entrance without being told because that had become my place over the years. Close enough to serve, far enough not to matter in photos. Piper came in from upstairs dressed like she was attending a luncheon and not a family meal. Cream sweater dress, gold hoops, hair blown out. On her right hand, catching the dining room light as she reached for a wine glass, was my grandmother's emerald ring. Not similar, not inspired by. The ring. Oval emerald. Gold band. Tiny chip in one corner of the setting, where Grandma June once caught it on a screen door and refused to fix it because she said flaws made things easier to recognize as yours. My breath went thin. Grandma June promised me that ring when I was 20 and sitting with her going through old recipes. She said it in front of my mother. When she said, "This one goes to Celeste. She's the one who remembers what things mean." I looked at Piper's hand, then at my mother. "Where did she get that?" My voice was flatter than I intended. Piper touched the ring immediately, smiling. "Mom gave it to me." I turned to my mother. Mom lifted one shoulder as if this were ordinary. "Piper's here more." It made sense. That room went so quiet I could hear one of the kids in the basement bouncing a ball against concrete. My Aunt Helen looked down at her plate. Nolan stared into his drink. Dad shifted in his chair and did not say one word. I said, "Grandma left that for me." Piper's smile sharpened. "Grandma said a lot of sentimental things." My mother cut in before I could answer. "Not today, Celeste. Not today." That phrase has excused so much theft in families. Not today means swallow it. Like not today means protect appearances. Not today means your pain is inconvenient because company is present. So I nodded once and said nothing, but something had already changed. After lunch, people drifted into the living room with pie plates and bourbon and coffee. I was near the fireplace talking softly to Aunt Helen when Piper started one of her performances from the sofa. You know the kind. Stories that sound playful unless you were there. Remember when Cece cried at her debate tournament because nobody came to see her? She's always been intense. She means well, she just takes things so personally. The room laughed in small guilty bursts. My mother didn't stop her. Dad didn't look up from the game. And the worst part was that every version of those stories had just enough truth in it to function as a weapon. Yes, I had cried at 16. Because my mother forgot and my father didn't come, and I won first place to an empty hallway. Yes, I had taken things personally because they were personal. Piper leaned forward, smiling at the room. "I just wish Celeste knew how to be part of a family without making everything feel transactional." That sentence landed like a stone dropped in a well. I looked at her. She looked right back. There are moments when two people know a war has started before anyone else hears the first shot. That was one. I needed water mostly, so I wouldn't answer her in front of everyone before I knew exactly how much I knew. The only clear path to the kitchen cut between the coffee table and the end of the sofa where Piper was perched. I turned sideways and moved through the gap. My shoulder brushed hers. Barely. Not enough to wrinkle fabric. Not enough to justify anything. Her hand came across my face so fast my body registered the sound before the pain. A sharp crack, then heat, then the metallic taste of blood at the inside corner of my mouth where my teeth caught skin. The room froze, actually froze. My head turned with the force of it, then slowly came back. My cheek was on fire, my left eye watered from impact. Piper was breathing hard, her hand still half lifted, her face gone ugly and flat in a way I had only seen in private before. No one moved. I did not touch my face. I did not slap her back. I did not scream. I stood there in the middle of that room smelling bourbon and cinnamon and roasted meat and looked around at the people I had fed, financed, defended, and shown up for. And I waited. Because the first voice after violence tells you who people are. My mother was first. She crossed the room quickly, and for one stupid second I thought she was coming to me. She stopped in front of me instead. "Apologize to your sister right now," she said, "or get out." I stared at her. She hit me. "You provoked her," Mom said. "You always know how to provoke." The words went through me colder than the slap had. I looked at my father then. He stood up, walked to the front door, opened it and held it. No speech, no outrage, no confusion. Just that door opening onto November dark, like he had been waiting all day for a use for it. Aunt Helen said his name under her breath. "Russell." He didn't answer. Piper had already shifted on the couch, crying now. Not real crying. The strategic kind. Wet eyes, trembling mouth. Like she did that on purpose, she whispered to the room, touching her own face like she was the one injured. I stood there and understood something so cleanly it almost felt merciful. The choice had already been made, not in that second. Years earlier. The second they decided the daughter who paid could also be sacrificed. So I reached for my coat, took my keys, and walked to the open door as calmly as if I were leaving a work event 10 minutes early. My father still did not look at me. When I passed him, I caught the smell of his aftershave and cold air at the same time. Familiar and useless. The porch light buzzed overhead. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to my car. Behind me, the door closed, then the deadbolt. That sound stayed with me longer than the slap. The drive back to Richmond was all the dark highway and numbness. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't turn on music. Around Fredericksburg, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Helen. "I'm sorry, that was wrong." All of it. I read it at a stoplight and put the phone face down again. When I got back to my apartment a little after 11, the air smelled like cold pavement and cedar mulch. The lobby was empty except for a fake poinsettia arrangement near the mailboxes. I almost went straight upstairs. Then I heard Derek's voice in my head. I should tell you about Derek. Derek is Piper's husband. Soft-spoken, real estate appraiser. The kind of man who looks like he has spent half his life swallowing words to keep the peace. Earlier that afternoon, just before the family photo, he had caught me in the back hallway outside the bathroom. His tie was loosened. His face looked strained. He said, hurrying very quietly, "When you get home, check your mail. Not email, your actual mailbox." Then Piper called for him from the living room, and he flinched like a man being yanked by an invisible leash. That was all he gave me. "Check your mail." Standing there in my apartment lobby with my cheek still faintly throbbing, I suddenly knew I had been dreading this for hours. I opened my mailbox. Junk, catalog, water bill, and one certified envelope from the Hanover County Clerk's office. My hands started shaking before I even tore it open. Inside was a recorded copy of a deed amendment. The property was my parents' house. The filing had been entered 24 days earlier. My name, Celeste Arden, had been removed. A new co-owner had been added. Piper Langford. At the bottom were 4 signatures: Russell Arden, Denise Arden, Piper Langford, and mine. Except it was not mine, not even close. My name looked wrong in every possible way, too round, too slow. The C looped incorrectly. The T wasn't crossed the way I cross it. It looked like somebody had stared at my signature on a birthday card and tried to imitate confidence. I stood there under bad lobby lighting with the paper in my hands and the dead stillness that comes when suspicion becomes fact. Not conflict, not misunderstanding. Forgery. Then I saw the next document in the packet. A notice of recorded collateral line. Home equity draw. $92,000. Secured against the property. My stomach went cold, because that meant they hadn't just taken me off the deed. They had used the cleaned up ownership to borrow against value I had paid to preserve. And if the lender had relied on a forged signature or identity confirmation tied to my prior interest, this was no longer ugly family behavior. This was criminal. I went upstairs without taking off my coat, dropped my purse on the kitchen table, scanned every page, photographed everything. Then I emailed Marcus Lane with one line. They forged my signature and opened debt against the house. Call me at 8. He called at 7:58. That is when the real story began. Marcus didn't start with sympathy. He started with silence, the kind that tells you he's already 3 steps ahead of what you're about to say. Send me everything, he said. I already had. He opened the files while I was still on the phone. I could hear the faint shuffle of paper, the click of his pen against his desk. No wasted words, no softening. Okay, he said finally. Last, don't contact them again. Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. And do not warn them. My fingers tightened around the edge of the kitchen counter. What am I looking at? Another pause, then flat and precise. Forgery of a recorded instrument. Potential mortgage fraud. Possibly identity misuse depending on what they submitted to the lender. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt clinical, like a diagnosis you already knew but didn't want confirmed. I looked down at the document again, my name sitting there in ink that wasn't mine. They removed me from the deed, I said. Yes. And they opened a line of credit. Yes. And the bank approved it. Yes. That last part landed differently, because that meant someone had vouched for authenticity. Someone had accepted that signature. Or worse, and someone had helped make it look real. Marcus exhaled quietly. Celeste, listen to me carefully. This is no longer a family dispute. This is a legal event. You're going to treat it like one. My voice came out steady. I am. Good, he said. Because what happens next depends entirely on how disciplined you are. I pulled a chair out and sat down slowly. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the candle I'd left burning before I went to Ashbourne. Vanilla and something synthetic. It made the room feel disconnected from what I was holding in my hands. What do? We build a file, he said. Then we give them one opportunity to correct it. After that, we escalate. How long? 15 days. 15 days. 15 days between what they had done and what it would cost them. Marcus spoke again. Before we do anything formal, I want a full timeline. Every payment you've made connected to that property. Every transfer, every receipt, every email. I want it organized, dated, and labeled. I closed my eyes for a second. I already have most of that. I assumed you would. There was a faint shift in his tone then. Not warmth, recognition, because this was my language. Paper, numbers, patterns. I stood up and walked into my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and pulled out a slim black folder. Inside were 8 years of quiet support. Wire confirmations, mortgage statements, contractor invoices, medical transfers, insurance supplements, salon funding, everything I had never needed to show anyone, until now. I can send it in an hour, I said. Send it in 30 minutes, Marcus replied. Then he hung up. No goodbye, no reassurance, just movement. I set the phone down and stood there in the middle of my apartment. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, the humiliation fell away. Not the memory of it, the weight of it. Because humiliation only works when you accept the version of yourself they present, and suddenly I didn't. I walked to my closet. Pulled out a navy suit I usually reserve for investor meetings. Tailored, structured, sharp. I changed slowly, button by button, zipper, heels, hair pulled back clean. Minimal makeup, the version of me my family had never bothered to understand. Then I sat down at my desk and started building the file. It took exactly 27 minutes. Every payment I had ever made tied to that house went into a spreadsheet. Date, amount, purpose, proof. Total at the bottom, $312,480. I stared at that number for a full 5 seconds. And then I closed the file. Because numbers don't need emotion. They just need to be seen. I sent everything to Marcus. Then I did something small, quiet, and final. I opened my banking app. There were 3 standing transfers tied to my parents. Monthly support, $1,350. Quarterly business support to Piper's account, $6,000. Mortgage assistance buffer, $900. I canceled all three. No hesitation, no warning, no explanation. Just taps on a screen. 8 years ended in under a minute. I didn't feel powerful. I felt precise. That's the difference. My phone started vibrating 10 minutes later. Mom. I watched it ring. Didn't answer. It rang again and again. Then Piper. Then Mom again. Then a message from Dad. We need to talk. I turned my phone face down and let them all stack. Because the next move wasn't emotional. It was structural. At 10:30 a.m., I was sitting across from Marcus in his office, floor-to-ceiling windows, city noise filtered into a low hum, the smell of paper and coffee and something faintly metallic from the filing cabinets. He had printed everything, stacked, tabbed, annotated. This is clean, he said, tapping the top of the file. They used your equity. I know. They used your identity. I know. And they assumed you wouldn't notice. That part made me almost smile. I didn't. Marcus slid a document toward me. The forged deed. Look at it again. I did. This time slower. Signature placement slightly off. Pressure inconsistent. Ink variation. They rushed it, I said. Yes. They didn't expect scrutiny. No. He leaned back slightly. That works in your favor. I nodded. What about the bank? They have exposure, he said. They approved a secured line against a property with a compromised signature. That means their compliance department is going to move fast once we notify them. And Piper? Marcus didn't soften it. If she signed your name knowingly, that's felony forgery. The word didn't shock me. It settled, like a piece of furniture finally placed where it belonged. What about my parents? They signed the transfer under their own names, he said. Their defense will be ignorance. I held his gaze. Do you believe that? Marcus paused, then carefully. Belief isn't relevant. Evidence is. Fair, always fair. He reached for another document. 3 letters. Cease and desist. One addressed to Piper, one to my parents, one to the bank. Each one structured like a quiet explosion. Restore the original deed. Freeze and close the line of credit. And provide full accounting of all withdrawn funds. 15 days to comply. Failure to comply results in civil and criminal escalation. Clean, direct, unforgiving. Do we send these today? I asked. Yes, I took a breath. Not deep, just enough. Send them. He slid them into envelopes, sealed them, labeled them, then looked at me one more time. You're sure? I met his eyes. They already decided this wasn't family. He nodded once. That was enough. By noon, the letters were in motion. By 1:15, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Mom didn't start angry. She started confused. Celeste, something's wrong with the account. I know. The transfer didn't come through. I stopped it. Silence. A heavy one. What do you mean you stopped it? I mean I'm no longer funding a property I was illegally removed from. Her breath hitched. What are you talking about? You can read the letter when it arrives. Celeste. Mom, I said calmly, someone forged my name. The word hung there. She didn't respond immediately, which told me everything. Because innocent people don't pause at that word. They react, they deny, they ask questions, they don't go quiet. You're overreacting, she said finally. There it was, the script. The same one she'd used my whole life. You need to talk to Piper before you start making accusations? I don't need to talk to anyone, I said. I have the documents. Family doesn't handle things like this. I almost laughed. Family doesn't forge signatures either. Her voice sharpened. You're blowing this out of proportion? No, I said quietly. I've been minimizing it for years. Another silence. Then the shift from confusion to anger. Dice, if you do something that hurts this family, I'm protecting myself. You're being selfish. I let that sit because it deserved to. I'll talk to you after you read the letter, I said. Then I hung up. Not dramatic, not loud, just done. My phone lit up immediately. Piper. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. She was already crying, but not the controlled kind. This was messier, faster. You can't do this to me, she said. To you? Yes to me. You're going to ruin everything. I leaned back in my chair. You forged my signature. I didn't. You did. Silence. Then smaller. Mom and Dad said it was fine. There it was. Blame transfer. Predictable. They can explain that to a judge, I said. Celeste, please, she said, voice breaking. I'll fix it. I'll put your name back. I'll close everything. But just don't take this further. You already took it further. No, you stole $92,000 using my equity. She sobbed, real this time, ugly, desperate. I needed it, she whispered. I closed my eyes briefly, not in sympathy, in clarity. That's not how need works, I said. You're going to destroy us, she said. No, I replied calmly. I just stopped protecting you. She made a sound like something collapsing. Then the line went dead. I set my phone down, looked around my apartment, quiet, still mine. For the first time in years, there was no invisible weight tied to another house, another account, another emergency I hadn't created. Just space and time and something sharper than anger. Control. Marcus called at 3:40. The bank responded. That was fast. They're nervous, he said. Thus, they've frozen the line of credit pending investigation. I exhaled slowly. Good. That means no more withdrawals. What about the deed? We file with the county Monday. Lease pendants. Public notice, frozen property. No movement without resolution. The kind of pressure you don't escape quietly. When that hits, Marcus said, everyone will know something's wrong. I thought about Ashbourne, small town, tight circles, loose whispers, good. They had 15 days, I said. They still do. I smiled slightly. Not because I was happy, because I was done being patient. I'm not reacting, I said. I know, Marcus replied. You're calculating. Exactly. And the worst part for them, they still thought this was emotional. They still thought I was hurt. They still thought I might fold. They had no idea the trap had already started closing. And I hadn't even stepped into the room yet. The public filing hit on Monday at 11:12 a.m. Marcus texted first. It's recorded. That was all. No flourish, no victory language. Just fact. I was in a conference room on the 12th floor of our office reviewing a boutique hotel acquisition package in Charleston when my phone lit up. Through the glass wall, I could see my team at their desks moving through a normal workday. Keyboards, coffee cups, muted phone calls. Real life continuing the way it always does, even when yours has just split cleanly down the middle. I opened the message, then the county portal. There it was. A lice pendants filed against my parents' property. Public record. A legal notice attached to the house for anyone with enough curiosity and internet access to search the address. No sale, no refinance, no transfer. No pretending nothing had happened. My family had spent years living inside a carefully managed performance, respectable house, stable marriage, close daughters, hardworking parents, Piper's business. My support had funded half that illusion, and by noon on a Monday, one filing had put a crack right through the center of it. I looked at the property record on my phone for a long moment. Then I locked the screen, set it face down on the table, and went back to the Charleston numbers. That part matters. Because I did not stop my life to stage manage their consequences. I kept working. That was the beginning of the real shift. For years, every family emergency had become the center of my week, my budget, my emotions, my capacity. Suddenly, for the first time, their crisis was not my job to absorb. At 12:47, Piper called again. I didn't answer. At 1:02, my mother didn't answer. At 1:16, my father, also no. At 1:34, a text from an unknown number. This is Nolan. Please call me. It's important. I stared at it. Piper's husband had never once reached out to me directly in 8 years unless he needed seating charts, invoices, a vendor recommendation, or someone to cover for Piper when she was having a hard week. I should have ignored it. I didn't. Not because I owed him anything. Because information is useful, and men married to women like Piper tend to become honest only when the ceiling starts caving in. I called him from the parking garage after work. His voice sounded frayed before he even said hello. Celeste? Yes. He exhaled so hard it crackled over the line. Thank you for calling back. I leaned against a concrete pillar beside my car. The garage smelled like oil, hot rubber, and damp dust. What is it? He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "She's been lying for a long time." That was not news, but the shape of his voice told me the details might be. How long? I asked. At least a year on the house stuff, maybe longer. I closed my eyes briefly. Be specific. So he was. And once he started, he did not stop. Piper had told him the property transfer was a temporary title adjustment for tax reasons. She told him my name was being removed because I didn't want the liability anymore. She told him my parents had approved it, the bank approved it, and I would sign once the paperwork was mailed. She said, "You hate details and always dump that stuff on other people," he said quietly. I actually laughed. One short, disbelieving breath in a concrete garage. Bah, did that sound true to you? No, he said, but by then she already had me tangled in the business account. There it was, money, always. What business account? He lowered his voice, though there was no one around me to hear. The line of credit money didn't just go to the studio. Some of it covered her personal cards, some payroll, some back rent, and he stopped. And some of it paid off a judgment from a supplier she never told you about. I went still. How much? About 14,000. I said nothing. Nolan continued in a rush now, like a man who knew delay no longer protected him. There are messages, emails. She talked about needing to move fast before you saw anything. She told me if I questioned her, she'd tell your parents I was the reason the business was failing. Classic Piper. Break the floor under everyone, and then make them grateful she's still standing. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. His answer came immediately. "Because I think she thought you'd roll over." That landed, because it was true. Not just for Piper, for all of them. They had built years of behavior around one assumption, that no matter how much I saw, no matter how badly they treated me, I would eventually choose stability over confrontation, because I always had before. I had been training them too, training them that my love had no visible limit. "Do you have proof?" I asked. "Yes." "What kind?" "A text chain, some emails, screenshots, the supplier judgment, the studio account summary." My grip tightened on my phone. "Send everything to Marcus Lane," I said. "I'll text you the address." He let out another long breath. Okay. And Nolan?" "Yeah." "Don't contact me again unless it's through counsel." A pause, then quietly, "Fair." I hung up. Not because I was angry, because the usefulness of the conversation had ended. That night, I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of cold white wine and my laptop open while city lights blurred beyond the window. The apartment was silent except for the refrigerator hum and the occasional hiss of traffic outside. I forwarded Nolan's materials to Marcus as they came in. Texts, account summaries, a screen recording of Piper scrolling through the studio banking app. One message in particular made my stomach turn. "If Cece notices, I'll just say Mom handled it and didn't explain the paperwork. She always backs down if it gets emotional enough." I read that line 3 times, not because I was shocked, and because nothing strips illusion from a family dynamic like seeing yourself reduced to a strategy. She always backs down if it gets emotional enough. That was their whole model. Not that I was generous, not that I was kind, that I could be manipulated if they piled enough guilt on top of the facts. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I whispered to no one, "Not anymore." Marcus called the next morning. "We're amending the complaint," he said without preamble. "The supplier judgment and business account commingling increase exposure. Your sister wasn't just borrowing against the property. She was laundering personal instability through forged collateral." I got up from bed and crossed to the window, phone at my ear. The sky over Richmond was gray and low. My reflection looked sharper than I felt. "So what does that change?" "It changes leverage," he said, "and it changes how afraid they should be." I leaned my forehead lightly against the cool glass. "What about my parents?" Another pause, then still no formal response. That told me everything. My parents had received legal letters. They knew my name had been forged. They knew the line of credit had been frozen. They knew the house was publicly flagged. And still, no formal response. Silence is a strategy in families that think shame can outlast truth. Marcus knew it too. "If they don't respond by Friday," he said, "we initiate direct motion to unwind the deed and preserve restitution claims." "Do it." No hesitation, I looked down at the sapphire ring on my hand. Not the family ring from the old story. This one was mine. A deep blue Ceylon stone set in platinum. I bought it for myself after closing a hotel portfolio in Savannah 2 years earlier. The first deal where I stopped waiting for someone else to commemorate my own success. No hesitation, I said. Good. Then he added, and one more thing. The bank's internal review suggests the HELOC officer may have relied on a notarization that is also defective. I straightened. Defective how? The notary seal appears valid. The journal entry does not. That was bad, not just for Piper, for everyone. Because defective notarization means either carelessness so severe it borders on misconduct, or an arrangement someone assumed would never be scrutinized. Can they unwind it quickly? I asked. Yes, he said, especially now that the county filing exists. Nobody wants to defend a forged signature once the paper trail starts glowing. I almost smiled at that. Paper trail starts glowing. That was exactly what it felt like. By Thursday, the first social cracks started showing. Ashbourne is the kind of town where no one says scandal directly. It comes in softer forms. A friend of my mother's did not comment on her Thanksgiving centerpiece post the way she usually did. Piper's studio page, disabled comments. My Aunt Helen texted me at 6:14 p.m. People are talking, I wrote back. About what? She responded. The house, the filing, Piper's line of credit. Church women have too much time and county websites. That made me laugh for the first time all week. Aunt Helen called 10 minutes later. I answered. She didn't waste time. Your mother hasn't been to Thursday prayer group, she said. I stood barefoot in my kitchen, stirring pasta sauce I wasn't hungry for. I'm not surprised. Helen lowered her voice. Your father looks terrible. That one got under my skin in a way I hated. Because no matter how clean the legal line was, there is something in a daughter that still flinches when someone says your father looks old. I kept my voice even. He held the door open for me, Aunt Helen. I know. No, I need you to hear that. He held it open. She exhaled slowly. I know, honey. We were quiet for a moment. Then she said something that shifted the room inside me just slightly. He's ashamed. I stared at the steam rising from the pot. Good, I said, not cruelly, just honestly. Because shame is not justice. But sometimes it is the first proof that reality got through. Helen changed the subject then, and gently the way older women do when they know you are balancing on the edge of something and don't want to shove. Your mother gave Piper too much room, she said, and your father gave everyone else too much silence. I almost said including me. Instead, I asked, did she know? Helen did not answer quickly. That answer was answer enough. She knew enough to ask fewer questions than she should have, she said at last. That was my mother exactly, not architect, not innocent, just emotionally invested in the version of events that kept her comfortable. We ended the call without drama. No advice, no forgiveness lecture, no family first speech. God bless women like Aunt Helen. They understand the truth is sometimes the most merciful thing in the room. Friday morning, 5 days before the formal response deadline, my father called. I watched his name on the screen for 4 rings before answering. Hello? He did not say my name at first. I heard him breathing, heard a faint porch sound in the background. Wind, maybe. A distant truck. The hollow outdoor quality of voice carried through cold air. Cece. He hadn't called me that in years. Not since before things got fully transactional between us. I said nothing. I need to talk to you. I moved to the dining table and sat down slowly. You can talk. Another long breath. Your mother didn't know about the signature. I looked at the grain of the wood under my hand. Did she know about the transfer? Silence. Then she thought it was paperwork. That's not what I asked. His voice tightened slightly. She knew there was title work. There it is. Celeste, no, don't use that tone with me now. She knew there was title work on a house I helped save and nobody called me. That is not confusion, Dad. That is consent through avoidance. I could hear him swallow. The old him would have stopped there, quiet, done, retreating into passivity, but he kept speaking. Piper said you'd agreed, and you believed her. A long silence, then very softly, I believed what was easier. That landed so hard I had to look away from nothing. because it was the first honest thing he had said about our family in maybe 20 years. Not I didn't know, not I was trying to help. Not this got out of hand. I believed what was easier. There it was, the whole architecture. I know, I said. He let out a rough breath. Can we fix this without lawyers? That question made me close my eyes. Not because I was tempted, because even now, after the deed, the debt, the public filing, the slap, the open door, he still wanted the comfort of private correction without public consequence. No, I said. He sounded older after that, smaller. She's your sister. She committed a felony against me. She made a terrible mistake. She made a plan. The line went quiet. Then he said the thing I had been waiting to hear since Thanksgiving and somehow still wasn't prepared for. I should have stopped it that night. My hand tightened on the table edge. Yes, I said. He did not defend himself, did not explain. Just stayed there in the silence on the other end of the call. Finally close enough to truth to stop moving. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. I'm sorry. I believed him. That was the problem. I believed him, and it still changed nothing. Dad, I said quietly, an apology is not the same thing as repair. Another pause. I know. For the first time in my life, I think he actually did. We hung up without goodbye. I sat there afterward for a long time, looking at my phone on the table. I did not cry, but grief moved through me anyway. Because this is the part no one tells you about righteous decisions. You can be completely correct and still mourn what had to die to make the decision possible. That afternoon, Marcus emailed me the revised complaint draft. Tighter, meaner, cleaner. Nolan's messages appended, supplier judgment attached, business account analysis included, questionable notarization flagged. At the bottom, the request for relief expanded, full deed restoration, cancellation of the fraudulent collateral line, accounting of all distributed funds, preservation of rights for criminal referral, costs. There was something about that word that made me sit up straighter, because families love treating a competent daughter like free infrastructure. But every system has costs, legal costs, emotional costs, time costs, reputational costs, and at some point, someone has to pay them. I emailed back one word, proceed. The weekend before the deadline, the first begging started. Not from Piper, from my mother. She called Saturday evening while I was in my bedroom fastening the clasp of a black dress. For a charity dinner I had almost skipped. I answered because I was tired of being surprised by voicemails. She was crying immediately, not loud, not theatrical, wet, frayed, real enough to be inconvenient. Please, she said, please don't do this. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the dress half fastened at the back. It's already being done. You're tearing this family apart? I looked at myself in the mirror across the room. Bare shoulders, gold earrings, steady face. No, I said, I'm stopping it from using me as glue. She made a broken sound. We're going to lose the house. That sentence would have worked on me once, maybe even 6 months earlier. But paper changes things. No, I said, you're going to lose the version of the house that depended on fraud. She fell silent, then quietly, dangerously, you always cared more about money than people. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Mom, if I cared more about money than people, I would have stopped paying for all of you years ago. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ear. Then she whispered, Ari, I just wanted peace. There it was, the favorite excuse of cowards and enablers everywhere. Peace. Meaning, the arrangement where the quiet daughter absorbs damage and everyone else gets to call the result harmony. That wasn't peace, I said, and that was me financing your comfort. I ended the call before she could answer. Then I stood up, fastened my dress, put on lipstick, took my black leather clutch from the dresser, and then went to the dinner anyway. That mattered too, because while they were imploding 3 hours away around a fraud they had created, I was walking into a room full of investors and city officials, smelling like white wine, polished silver, and peonies, and my life was still mine. I did not react. I calculated, and the trap was almost ready. They just didn't know yet that by trying to save themselves privately, that they were about to hand me the last proof I needed in public. The deadline was Monday at 5 p.m. By 4:12, there was still nothing. No attorney, no formal response, no attempt to restore the deed, no move to close the line of credit. Just silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from confusion. The kind that comes from people hoping a problem will dissolve if they refuse to look directly at it. I was in my office, standing by the window with a file open in my hand, watching traffic crawl through late afternoon light. The sky had that pale winter glare that makes everything look sharper than it feels. My phone buzzed. Marcus. They missed it, he said without greeting. I closed the file slowly. Okay. That was all I said, because everything else had already been decided days ago. We move forward, he continued. I'm filing the criminal referral package first thing in the morning. The civil motion expands immediately after. Do it. No hesitation, no second guessing. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, my reflection faint in the glass. 6 months ago, that version of me would have been pacing, thinking, replaying conversations, wondering if there was a softer way now. There was just stillness, not empty, controlled. Because the truth is, the hardest part had already happened. Not the filing, not the evidence, not the legal language. The hardest part was the moment I realized I was no longer protecting them. Everything after that was execution. At 5:03 p.m., my phone lit up again. Piper. I watched it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Hello. She was crying. Not the sharp, performative crying I had heard my whole life. Angst was uneven, breath-catching, words tripping over themselves. You can't do this, she said. I walked back to my desk and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. I already have. No, you don't understand. The bank called. They said there's going to be an investigation. They said the county, Celeste, please. Her voice broke completely. I waited because when people like Piper panic, they start telling the truth without realizing it. They said I could go to jail. There it was. Not we made a mistake. Not this got out of hand. I could go to jail. Consequences had finally entered the room. You forged my signature, I said calmly. I didn't think. I know. That cut her off. Because the truth is she didn't think. Not about legality, not about risk, not about me. She thought about access to money. It's access to control, access to a version of life she hadn't earned. And she assumed I would absorb the cost like I always had. Please, she said again, softer now. I'll fix it. You had 3 weeks. I didn't know it would get this bad. It got this bad the moment you signed my name. Silence. Then desperate. Mom and Dad said it was okay. I almost smiled, even now, even here. Still reaching for someone else to stand behind. Then they can explain that to the DA, I said. Her breathing hitched. You're really going to do this to your own family? I leaned back in my chair. No, I said, I'm doing this for myself. And then I hung up. No anger, no raised voice, just final. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time, nothing in motion depended on me sacrificing myself to keep it moving. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., Marcus filed the criminal referral, forgery of a recorded instrument, real estate fraud, supporting documentation attached, handwriting analysis included, bank irregularities flagged, the kind of package that doesn't get ignored. By 11:30, the first official response came, not from Piper, not from my parents, from the bank. Their legal department, 3 paragraphs of controlled urgency. They acknowledged receipt of notice, confirmed internal review, and stated that the line of credit remained suspended pending investigation. Translation? They knew they had exposure, and they were moving to contain it. At 2:14 p.m., Piper's attorney finally appeared. Late, rushed, the kind of attorney people hire when they're already in trouble and running out of time. Marcus forwarded me the email. I read it once, then again. Request for negotiation, proposal to resolve the matter privately, offer to restore the deed immediately, offer to restructure repayment, no admission of wrongdoing. Of course not. People don't confess when they still think they can manage the fallout. Marcus called 5 minutes later. What do you want to do? I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the street below. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Someone crossed the sidewalk carrying groceries. Normal life continuing as always. What's the cleanest outcome? I asked. For you? Yes. Full restoration of the deed, immediate closure of the HELOC, full accounting of funds, and cooperation with the investigation. And if they don't agree to all of it, we proceed. I didn't need time to think. Then that's the only option. He exhaled, satisfied. I'll respond. By Wednesday, the pressure started to fracture them. Not publicly, not yet privately, where it matters first. Nolan filed for separation. I found out through Marcus, not through him. He had retained counsel, submitted documentation, distanced himself from Piper's financial activity. Smart. Late, but smart. Piper called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail. Just one. Her voice was small. I don't know what to do. For a second, I stood in my living room holding my phone, listening to that sentence. And I felt something. Not sympathy, not anger, recognition. Because for the first time in her life, and Piper was standing in a situation she could not charm, cry, or manipulate her way out of. There was no audience, no performance, just consequences. I deleted the voicemail. Thursday morning, Marcus called again. They've agreed to restore the deed. I poured coffee slowly, the sound of it filling the quiet kitchen. And the HELOC? Closing. Bank is cooperating now. Accounting? Partial. We'll push for full. And the criminal side? Pause. They want you to withdraw. Of course they did. That was the real ask. Fix the paperwork. Close the account. Make it look like an administrative error, and then quietly step away before anything official attached to Piper's name. No, I said, like I assumed. Because here's the thing no one tells you until you're standing inside it. People will always offer you just enough resolution to protect themselves, never enough to protect you. Friday, the deed was officially restored. My name back in place, clean, legal, undeniable. Marcus sent me the updated record. I looked at it for a long time. Not with relief, with clarity. Because I didn't want the house. I never had. What I wanted was proof. Proof that what they had done was real. Proof that it could not be erased with excuses. Proof that I was not crazy for seeing it. I closed the file, and then I did something none of them expected. I told Marcus to prepare a transfer. Sell my share to my parents for $1. He paused. Arby, you're sure? I don't want any attachment to that property. It's worth significantly more than that. I know. This wasn't about value. This was about exit, about removing every financial thread they could ever use to pull me back in. By Monday, the paperwork was ready. By Tuesday, it was signed. $1. That was the cost of my freedom, and the end of any argument they could ever make that I owed them something tied to that house. The criminal case moved forward anyway because I did not withdraw, because forgiveness and accountability are not the same thing, and because some lines once crossed cannot be walked back, just because the consequences finally arrived. The real unraveling started after that, not loud, not dramatic, slow, precise. I didn't watch it happen, I didn't need to. I could feel it in the silence, in the absence of calls, in the sudden quiet where there had once been constant demand. For years, my phone had been a pipeline. Requests, problems, bills, emergencies. Now, nothing. And that silence told me everything. The system had collapsed because I was no longer holding it up. One evening, about 3 weeks later, Aunt Helen called. I answered on the second ring. How are you? She asked. Fine. She hesitated. Your father sits on the porch every morning now. I looked out my window. The city lights reflected back at me. He always sat, I said, not like this. I didn't ask what she meant because I already knew. Regret changes posture. Silence changes weight. He talks about you, she added. I let that sit. What does he say? Another pause. Bah, he says he didn't understand what you were carrying. That landed somewhere quiet inside me. Not sharp, not painful, just final. Okay, I said. Helen didn't push. She never did. We talked about small things after that. Weather, her garden, nothing that required repair. When we hung up, I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, and I realized something. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for them to understand me. I was already past it, and that was the real shift. Not the filings, not the investigation, not even the consequences. The shift was internal. I was no longer available for the version of the story where I fixed everything and disappeared inside it. I had stepped out, and I was not stepping back in. The final part didn't come with a phone call, or a letter, or an apology. It came quietly, that in the form of a document Marcus forwarded 2 months later. Subject line, disposition. I opened it, read it once, then again, and sat back in my chair, because the end of their story had finally caught up with them. The document was 3 pages, clean, formal, final. No emotion in it, just facts. Charges filed, agreement reached, terms set. Piper had accepted a plea, 2 years supervised probation, full financial restitution, mandatory reporting, a permanent record attached to her name. I read it slowly, not because it was complicated, but because I wanted to feel exactly what it didn't make me feel. No satisfaction, no rush, no sense of victory, just quiet. Because by the time consequences arrived, I had already walked away. Marcus called a few minutes later. "It's done," he said. "Dax, I saw. You want a copy of the full file?" No. I didn't need it. I didn't need every detail, every timeline, every piece of evidence neatly organized in a binder. I had lived it. "That's it then," he added. "Yes." He hesitated. "You handled this well." I smiled a little at that, not because it was praise, because it was accurate. "I handled it correctly," I said, "and there's a difference." After we hung up, I closed my laptop and sat there for a while, elbows resting lightly on the table, fingers folded together. Outside, the light was softer now, late afternoon drifting toward evening. The kind of light that makes everything feel slower than it is. 6 months. That's how long it had taken from the night I walked out to the moment everything settled into place. 6 months to undo 16 years of silence. 6 months to return things to what they should have been all along. But here's the part no one prepares you for. The end doesn't feel like a climax. It doesn't feel like fireworks or applause or some cinematic moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It feels like space. Space where noise used to be. Space where pressure used to sit on your chest. Space where you can finally hear your own thoughts without someone else's voice layered over them. That evening, I opened my nightstand drawer. The sapphire ring was still there, wrapped in tissue, untouched. I lifted it carefully, the way you hold something that carries more meaning than weight. The stone caught the light from the lamp beside my bed, deep blue, almost violet at the edges, and that small nick in the setting, the one I had memorized as a child, the one that made it imperfect, real, mine. I slid it onto my right hand. It fit exactly the way it always had, not loose anymore, not something I was trying on, something that belonged. I stood in front of the mirror for a moment, not examining, not judging, just looking. I didn't look stronger, or harder, or transformed in some obvious way. I looked the same, and completely different at the same time, because nothing external had changed. But internally, everything had shifted. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic, just something simple. I sat by the window, legs tucked under me, watching the street below, people walking, cars passing, a couple arguing softly near the corner, life continuing, uninterrupted. And for once, I wasn't holding anything together behind the scenes. I wasn't calculating. I wasn't anticipating the next problem. I wasn't bracing for the next call. I was just there, present, and it felt unfamiliar, in the best way. A week later, Aunt Helen came to visit. She brought groceries like she always did, even though I didn't need them, even though she knew I didn't need them. Some habits aren't about necessity, they're about care. We cooked together, simple food, garlic, onions, something simmering slowly on the stove. The smell filled the apartment, warm and grounding. For a moment, it felt like being back in a kitchen I actually belonged in. She didn't ask me about the case, didn't ask me about Piper, didn't ask me if I was going to call my parents. She knew better. Instead, she stirred the pot and said, "Your father started therapy." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Really?" She nodded. "Mine first time in his life." That made sense. Some people don't learn until something breaks in a way they can't ignore. "Your mother hasn't," she added. I didn't react. That also made sense. Is she still blaming me? I asked. Helen gave a small, thoughtful shrug. Not out loud. I smiled faintly. Progress. Just not the kind that involves accountability yet. We ate at the table. No tension, no unspoken expectations. Just two people sharing a meal without a hidden transaction underneath it. Before she left, she paused at the door. You did the hard thing, she said. I leaned lightly against the frame. I did the necessary thing. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Those are usually the same. After she left, the apartment felt quiet again, but not empty. There's a difference. Empty is what you feel when something is missing, and quiet is what you feel when nothing is taking from you anymore. A few days later, I drove past the exit that led to my parents' town. I didn't take it, but I didn't look away either. I kept my eyes on the road, steady, calm, because avoiding something gives it power. And I wasn't giving anything power over me anymore. I wasn't angry. That's important. People expect anger. They expect resentment. They expect you to carry something sharp and heavy as proof of what you went through. But anger ties you to the thing that hurt you. And I was done being tied to anything that required me to stay smaller than I was. I didn't hate my family. I want that to be clear. They weren't villains in some dramatic theatrical way. They were ordinary, flawed, comfortable in patterns that benefited them. I'm unwilling to question a system that worked as long as I stayed quiet. My father avoided conflict. My mother confused proximity with love. My sister built her life on access instead of effort. None of that makes them monsters. It just makes them people who got used to taking from someone who never said no. Until I did. And that's the part that changes everything. Not the fight, not the exposure, not even the consequences. The moment you say no and mean it, that's when the entire structure shifts. Because people can only take what you continue to offer. They can only cross boundaries you refuse to enforce. They can only rewrite your role if you keep showing up to play it. I used to think loyalty meant endurance, staying, absorbing, fixing, holding everything together no matter what it cost me. I thought love meant proving your worth by how much you were willing to carry. I was wrong. Loyalty to yourself comes first, always. Because if you abandon yourself to keep others comfortable, eventually there's nothing left of you to protect. And then, what are you offering anyone? Resentment, exhaustion, silence? That's not love, that's survival. And survival is not the same as living. You can love people and still refuse to let them hurt you. You can forgive someone and still never give them access to you again. You can walk away without slamming the door. And you can leave it closed without holding it open for people who have already shown you what they do when they walk through it. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Months passed, life settled into something steady. Predictable in the best way, work, home, quiet evenings. Occasional dinners with people who spoke to me like I existed. No emergencies, no hidden expectations, no financial strings tied to emotional manipulation. Just life. Mine. And sometimes, late at night, I would look down at the ring on my finger, that small imperfection catching the light, and I would think about the promise I made, keep them together. I did, for as long as it was mine to carry. But even bridges have limits, and no one tells you that when you're the one doing the holding, you have to learn it yourself, usually the hard way. Would I do it differently if I could go back? No. Because the version of me who stayed taught me exactly what I needed to know to become the version of me who left. And that version, she doesn't apologize for choosing herself. And so if you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever been the one carrying more than your share, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive when you finally speak up, if you've ever been made to feel like your worth depends on how much you give, ask yourself one question. What would happen if you stopped? Not dramatically, not angrily, just stopped. Stopped explaining, stopped fixing, stopped absorbing, stopped offering access to people who only show up when they need something from you. Because the truth is, the moment you stop giving, you find out very quickly who actually valued you and who just valued what you provided. And that clarity, that's where everything begins. That's where you begin.